All right, well, today we have Micah Mathews on the show. Hey, Micah, thanks for being on here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Hey, if you could, go ahead and tell the people what you do and what we do together here at Calvary.
Yeah, so I have the privilege of serving as the student and missions pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in Rosenberg. So I've been here for a little over 6.5 years now, getting to serve, and kind of my role has grown over the years, but yeah. And so anyway, it's exciting. I get to work with students, 6th through 12th grade. But then I'm also now over the last several years kind of gotten to take on this area of ministry and missions and kind of lead the church in both our local, regional and international mission efforts. And so that's been exciting, a new area to grow and to get to serve in and lead in. And so that's been exciting, been fun to be able to do that over the last several years. So.
That's cool. Yeah, you said you've been here at Calvary for 6.5 years?
Yeah, just over 6.5 years now.
Yeah. And funny thing, which we joke about here at the office every once in a while, you've been here 6.5 years, and you're the, I guess, senior most staff as far as longevity. Yeah. Pastor Nate has been here, 4 years, I think?
Yeah, right in that ballpark, yeah.
Yeah, so I was joking about that with another pastor, that when we have any questions about historical record for the church, we just turn to the student.
Yeah, it's
pastor.
rare that you're going to the guy that's in his 20s for that, but it's been a unique 6.5 years, but it's been great, and I've grown a lot and been able to see the church go through some interesting and then great growth too, I think, as well in the last 6.5+ years. So
yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you jump on here, is to talk about specifically leadership in ministry. You've had 6.5 years here at Calvary, and before that you were in school, and you've served in ministry in the student ministry at the church you were at before that, and then you've been in pretty much church since you were 5, from what I remember.
Yeah, since I was a little kid,
Yeah, so before we dive into the question of leadership, can you talk a little bit about what that was like growing up in a church and then coming now serving in a church?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, my grandpa was a pastor, but I grew up in small town East Texas, and so the churches I was growing up in, maybe total 100 or less people all the time, and so smaller churches. My grandpa worked a full-time job outside of ministry, and so though being really involved in the church, I never really thought about serving in the church as a vocation, as a career per se, and so I honestly didn't know that was an option. Like, that wasn't like a thing that I was super aware of growing up, but I was always in church. I mean, some of my earliest memories are sitting on the front pew of a church with my grandpa preaching. And so I've been in church basically my whole life, got saved when I was 5. And so that was great. And there were some ups and downs and periods maybe, in my childhood where maybe I wasn't quite as involved as others. And then when I was in high school, we moved a little closer to the Houston area, to a town called Dayton, just northeast of Houston. And that was where I kind of got involved in the first youth group that I'd ever really been around. Like, before that, the youth group was basically every child, like 18 to like newborn, and so there was like 12 of us total. And so getting to be a part of a real student ministry there, and getting to serve, and then to realize that my student pastor there actually worked at the church every day, and that was the first time that I'd kind of seen all of that. And there, though, is where I got to begin to really step into some leadership roles in the church, and had more opportunities to start specifically in student ministry at that time, and get to lead with some of our younger students, and get to lead small groups on our Wednesday night services, and then also even at the youth camp that we were a part of. And so that was really where God began to kind of turn the wheels in my heart and my mind, to see and open my eyes a little bit to see that this might be something that he was calling me to. And then, so the summer after my sophomore year of high school was when God began to call me to ministry. And so that was a process and a battle a little bit with me over the next couple of years there, but God made it clear that that's what he wanted me to do, and ultimately led me to be able to serve with internship opportunities through college, and then to step into my role here at Calvary. While I was still actually studying for my degree, my Christianity degree at Houston Baptist, I started working here. And so it all happened really fast, but my history in the church has been basically my whole life, but it's kind of grown and morphed over the years and what that looks like. And so
that's good. That's great. Yeah, it's interesting. As you said, you go to church or you're raised in church, and you're never really considering whether or not this is even a career, or, as you said, that it's even possible to have that as a career. So you mentioned you were raised in church pretty much from the age of 5, and you went to student ministry. Now you're a student ministry leader and missions pastor. And with that, obviously becomes certain levels of leadership and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. So one of the first questions I want to ask you, how do you personally define leadership?
Man, that's we're coming out swinging. No, it's hard for me to put. Leadership takes different forms, I think, in different places that we and I think there's so many different leadership styles and ways to do that. Especially working in student ministry, I think I've seen that play out in a lot of different ways. The kid that always talks the most and can stand up in front of people is not always the best leader, right? Like I've seen students that maybe aren't ones that are apt to say much, but they lead by example. They are great people of faith and can really help show people what it looks like to be a believer. And so I think I've kind of taken that on even as the leader of a student ministry as well, and tried to realize that I don't always have to just lead by saying more, but it can be by the way I live. I think it's a lot more about who you are than just what you say and what you do. And so that's been a big thing for me, because I think in the very beginning, like I said, I've been here for over 6.5 years. I was 22. And when I first stepped into this role, I was young. I was really trying to figure out what it meant to be a student pastor and what that looked like. And a lot of that was wrapped up in what are the right things I'm supposed to say? What are the things I'm supposed to do? But as I've served longer, I think it's become more clear that it's more important that God cares more about who I am. And then out of that, then I'm able to be a better leader, my words then carry more weight, my actions then carry more weight if there's value in who I am, and I'm showing them what it means to be a follower of Christ. And so that's been a big thing for me, because you can say a lot of great things. There's a lot of gifted speakers out there. There's a lot of people who are very attractive and flashy in their speech and their mannerisms and just their personality. But if that's not authentic, if that's not really who you are, then I don't know that person's actually a great leader. And so it's combining some of those skills. Yes, there are skills that we want to grow and techniques and want to be able to speak and communicate well. But I think I need to be able to back that and have that foundation of this is who I am in Christ. And that's been a huge part of me growing as a leader.
That's good. Yeah, well, a lot of what I'm hearing is like being a person of integrity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And authenticity. You made me think of a quote I heard, I think it was last week. They were talking about integrity and honesty. Honesty being when your words match reality, and integrity being when reality matches your words. Like you said, there's a lot of people that can be out there on stage on a Sunday or wherever, speak, do a great performance, I guess. But when you really get down to know who they are, they're not the same person that you see in front of the lights.
Yeah, and I think part of that too, right? Like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but part of that too, though, I think is not being afraid to like let the people that you're leading know that you have things that you're working on and struggling with too. Working with teenagers specifically, like if you pretend that everything is perfect in your life, they're going to see right through that stuff. Like, you know what I mean? And so like they need to know that you have either walked through and or walking through right now some of the things that they're dealing with, some of the same struggles that they have. And then I think it begins to carry more weight when you do give advice on those things. Where I think some people feel this pressure to feel like they're doing it all right, and so that's the only way that they can tell people or give people advice. But I think actually being honest about the things that we struggle with and the things that we're walking through and learning daily, and then I think that actually gives more of a platform for us to be able to lead and to be able to walk people through those struggles and not even so much struggles, just the natural progression and things that we go through in life. And so,
yeah. That's good. Yeah, that makes me think of a conversation I had with my kids recently. For those of us who have children, as you and your wife, y'all have y'all's little girl, and as conversations start happening, leadership happens first at home, even if you don't have children, or even if you're not married. Self-leadership. But with the dynamic of having kids, I was talking to them over a meal. I shared with them that somebody had made me very upset, and I asked them, what. I was like, how do you think that made Daddy feel? And they're like, oh, that made you feel very sad, Dad. I was like, no, it made me really, really angry. I was mad. And they go, really? I was like, yeah, Dad gets mad too when people say hurtful things. And our littlest one said, oh, I bet you wanted to punch him in the face. So I was like, I was like, well, sometimes I have those feelings but I, like you said, just want to let them know that I'm not perfect. And when I have those negative thoughts or bad feelings, that just, take every thought captive. So it's definitely a teaching moment.
Yeah, and I think it shows them that you're still growing and that you're still becoming who God wants you to be. Because then, otherwise, I think that children and adults and teenagers, everybody in between, can begin to think that, there's this level that we get to that then we've achieved it, and we're no longer need to keep working on these things. No, God's still working on us. We're still growing and molding. I'm still having to learn how to navigate new situations or even old situations, right? All the time. And so it's not that all of a sudden I get to this level that all of a sudden all those things go away, but God's going to continue to work on us, going to continue to place people in our lives to walk us through that. And so I think it's good to be honest and to be open and vulnerable as you lead, because you're not setting up this false expectation that all of a sudden all of those things are going to go away at some point. So
that's good. Now that we're talking through this, thinking about it, there's a hesitance, I think, with some leaders where they don't want to share that they're going through certain things. I think there's wisdom in not being not sharing everything, and if you haven't overcome something, you have to share, I guess, in different layers. The nitty gritty of all the details that should go up rather than down. But I know growing up, my dad and mom being a praying couple, they prayed together and they showed us and taught us how to pray. Thinking through it, I remember hearing my dad pray for forgiveness. What we're praying as a family, him praying for forgiveness in areas that he was may have failed of allowing his, temper at work get the best of him or something like that. But I think that's so important, not only, again, as leadership in the family, but leadership in ministry too, that we're struggling with something. It may not be egregious sins that we're struggling with, but even the thing of, in ministry, someone doing something that just frustrates us or rubs us the wrong way, and just expressing hey, God is working on us too. With that, another question: what are the most important practical lessons that you can share with us? Something that maybe no one taught you in ministry leadership, in formal education. What's something that you experienced, a situation or incident that helped you level up on your leadership?
So I think there's a lot of things that I've learned just on the practical side, right? My degree and my education was greatly beneficial to me, but it was really heavy on the theology side, and which I think is great, right? Because that's the foundation that then we can kind of build on, and everything else comes from. That's important. There's a lot of practical things that we didn't address. There's a lot of things that happen and that we talk about in the classroom that are great, but we don't even scratch the surface of half the kind of things I think that we run into in the church and those sort of experiences. And so I think some of the things that I've really began to learn and to see and to value both in leadership and then also just when it comes to just ministering to people and discipling, is just the importance of relationships and getting to know people, and actually not just treating them as a patient at a doctor's office, or just I'm trying to fix your problem and send you, but actually getting to know people and getting to minister, because sometimes I can take all of this information that I have from school stored in my head in my studies and even my own personal studies now, and I can have all this information and just view it as a math problem, right? They come in and it's what's the solution to this? But I think there's a more personal, these are real people this is a people business. This is a people industry. You know, when you talk about ministry, you're dealing with real people that are more complicated than that. And so that's something that I think I've learned as I've gotten further into ministry and served longer, is really just to take time to get to know people, to understand that different people work in different ways, and the same solution, you know, or the same way that I might minister to person A might be different than the way that I do person B. I can recall, this was several years ago, being on a short-term mission trip with our students, just like in the DFW area. And that week, I don't know what was in the water, but like, it just seemed that like there was a crisis like every 30 minutes with some student with different things going on. But we had another parent that was on the trip with us. And I remember on the ride home after this long week, it had been great, right? We did a lot of good things, but it had been a lot of like kind of drama or whatever here and there, just kind of breakdowns and stuff. But we're driving home. We got this 4-hour drive, and we get in, and the parent just looks over at me, and she was like, I don't know how you do that. Like, how do you like know to like, you know, you got to go and like sit and be sweet to this one, and then you can just like tell this one this thing or what. I'm like, it's just a matter of getting to know them, right? Like, I didn't come in day one doing that, like, but I've taken the time to get to know them, get to learn who they are, how they tick, you know. And I think the same way, like, you know, I only have one kid now, and she's just over 1, but I imagine the same kind of thing will work as we have more kids and as they get older, right? They're not all going to respond exactly the same way. And so I've just learned to really take time to get to know people, to understand people. I think that's what what drew me to student ministry in general, is it's a really relational and personal kind of ministry in nature. It's not as detached. It's very much, you know, kind of one-on-one or small group and that sort of thing, and getting to know people in that way. And that I love that, because sometimes when, you know, I love to preach, I love to do those things, but I also want to be able to follow up and talk with people and be able to walk them through things, and whether that be counseling or just talking about life and discipling people as well. I love to be able to understand how someone individually, how they work and what's going on for them, and how I can help minister to them specifically, and not just kind of paint everything with a broad brush. And so that's something that I don't think, you know, in school we didn't talk about a lot, right? We're just learning these foundational and sometimes beyond foundational, right? Much deeper. And I love those deep theological debates. And I roomed with several other Christianity majors, and we could sit around and have debates for hours, and that's fun. But most of what happens in ministry is like 99% of that stuff isn't what comes into it. Like, you know, and so these things of just getting to know people and ministry, then that value of that personal relationship and connection, I think, means so much.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Like you said, that in student ministry, there's definitely, there's the obvious need of having those one-on-one conversations. And that's true. Sarah and I were in a student ministry for a while before here at Calvary, and a, lack of a better word, successful student ministry really is in the level of relationships that are going on. Yeah. And that's true to say in church in general, like, you know, big church. Yeah. I know there's some people that may have I guess a desire to become pastors because they're great preachers, as we mentioned, but necessarily some people that are great preachers aren't necessarily really good pastors. And pastors is when you're coming down from the stage from the Sunday morning and doing the one-on-ones with them. What words of encouragement would you give to someone who's an awesome preacher, but they realize that their character is not of what you described, where they just have the, how do I put this? It's just not part of their character to do the one-on-ones. Maybe they're introverted, and they just don't naturally go that way. What kind of words of encouragement would you offer to them?
So I think we all have different giftings, right? Now, I don't think that just those giftings are we can't use those, I think, as an excuse just not to do things or to neglect certain areas. I think certain things require more work for some of us than others, right? I naturally enjoy the one-on-one conversation or the small group conversation and those sort of things. For others, that may not be the case, and that may not be their strong suit, right? And that may not be the thing that they're going to spend the majority of their time doing. But I do think I want to encourage those people that fall into that kind of personality trait or that mentality, still not to neglect that, because even though that may not be natural for them, I do think that even for their own sake, like it's beneficial, it's positive to have those relationships, to have that interpersonal connection in that way. But I also do think too, this is where it's important to have a good team around you, to where you have people, whether it be volunteers, whether it be other church staff, right? Contexts are different in different church sizes and structures and just kind of the way that they, and forms and stuff. But I think that it's important to place people around you. Like, because even within our team right here at Calvary, within our staff, there's so many different, personalities and giftings and skills. If, we in staffing a few weeks ago, we kind of joked about some of the personality tests. And I can remember, myself and Pastor Nate, like we fall on such different ends of the spectrum on so many things, but it actually works out great, I think, within a ministry context, because there's things where we can kind of pick up the slack for each other, where we can help. And like I said, not that we neglect the areas that aren't as well, but we can thrive in those areas where the other may not, right? Where the one person has to put in a little extra work. And so I think that's important. I think, and that's where it can be discouraging, I think, for people that aren't as great at something, is when they don't have a team of people around them to support them. Because then if they're trying to put in all that work to be good at the things that are really hard for them, the things that don't come natural to them, and then they don't have anybody there to kind of help pick up the loose ends and help encourage them in that can be important. So I think maybe part of that too is really focusing on whether that be volunteers or staff, putting people around you too that can help make you better, right? Who can teach you things that you're not great at, who can help you grow and because there's people who love the relationships and myself kind of falling into this category, love that stuff, but I'm not naturally the most, organized and structured person, right? And so it's good to have people in my life that can provide some of that, and people on a team that I serve with to provide some of those things. And so I think it's important that we know, and I think this maybe too is to be honest with ourselves, what are our weaknesses, what are our strengths, so we know where we need to put people around us and where we need to kind of lean on people to help build us up, and then also to even help fill in some of those holes.
That's good. Yeah, I remember that conversation we had about personality traits and leadership styles. We just had a similar conversation this Friday. A lot of us went out to the ball game, and my wife and I were sitting with you and your wife, and your wife asked, how can I help with this event that's coming up for the King event? And I just mentioned hospitality. I'm not great with hospitality. I mean, I enjoy hanging around people, but as we joke, I can go a whole day without eating just because I'm working, but other people eat. And I just, like when my kids have the opportunity for the kids to come to work with me, I might forget a packed lunch because I don't eat lunch. I don't eat lunch. Yeah. And it's not until like, hey, Dad, I'm hungry. Like, oh, yeah, y'all need to eat, don't you? The same thing, like we joke about, my office is the furthest away from everybody else's office. And I'm okay with that. I can be in here for an entire day and not talk to anybody, and I'm fine with that. But
and on the flip side, I'm the guy that traded to the office and then asked for the big window to be put in, so more people could see me and more people could come in and talk to me, right? Like, and so I think it's good, because if we all love to be tucked in a hole, right, like then maybe that wouldn't be great. But if we all love to be out in the open and social, but we might not ever get anything done. And so it's good to I think have that balance and to have people of different personalities and different skills and gifts and stuff even in a workplace and a ministry opportunity. I think those things are important to help us not go crazy too, and to actually get things done. So one of the things you mentioned earlier about the things that you learned at school that you had in your studies, and then things you learned also from your personal studies. I noticed you got some books behind you in your bookshelf, and being part of being a good leader, and then just be prepared to teach on Sundays and Wednesday nights. It involves studying. So what are some books that you're studying now, whether commentaries, leadership books, or just books of the Bible? Yeah, so we're going through one of my favorite books right now with our students, and anytime that I start to teach this book, I really kind of run off and start reading stuff and dig into it. So we're walking through the Book of Colossians right now, and so I've got some commentaries here. I have a series that you can see right over my shoulder here that is really, really practical. anyway, and so there's a handful of guys that kind of come together that I really like. And it's just a super practical kind of. I have some commentaries and some things that can really dig in on it on an intellectual level, and I like to do that some. But there's not a whole lot coming out of that to teach like 6th through 12th graders, and so there's more. This has some things that I think are challenging spiritually and pull some important things out, but also ways that we can kind of take those and apply those to our lives. So that's kind of what I've been walking through lately. Let me grab one. It's called Christ-Centered Exposition is the name of the series, but David Platt and a handful of other guys kind of came together, and each book has a couple of different editors on it, but they've got almost, I think, the entire Bible done now. They've done a huge chunk, and so I just kind of keep grabbing one each time I start to teach through a new book. But yeah, and so that's where I'm at right now. I love studying the Book of Colossians. I did a lot of study even in my education on Paul. It just kind of happened to fall. I took way more Christianity hours than were required for my degree. I was like, HBU doesn't exactly have the largest plethora of electives out there, and so I just kept taking more Christianity classes, which is great. But and so in that, I have a lot of stuff on Paul, and so this is one of the letters that I really, really enjoy to teach, kind of front to back through. And that's kind of my style too. Is I will typically teach through an entire book because I love to. For one, like college was a great time for me to be able to begin to understand the context of Scripture and what it meant then, and which I think then helps us have a better understanding of how it applies to us now. Where I think sometimes in my upbringing and stuff, I would miss that layer and not really know the context and what the original intent of the author was, and so I think and what God was trying to communicate to people at that time. And so anyway, so my education was big for me on that and understanding the importance of that. And so when I teach now to our students, I want to kind of pass that same importance on, that they understand what is actually happening in this letter. It is extremely important on what it speaks to our lives now and how that applies, but I think it's really hard to understand that in an accurate way if we don't understand what it meant then. And so, and what is being spoken and communicated in that letter at the time. And so, so I typically will teach through a whole book because that helps me do that, because I can give more context. I can kind of walk through. There's, especially in like Paul's letters, a lot of times there's a specific issue or kind of theme that will run throughout the letter. And so it's, I enjoy doing that. And so that's my typical style to kind of work through a whole letter for them. So, which gives me, I enjoy too, because then I can really dig into a book as I prep and prepare to teach, and can kind of run off in my own studies as well. So
that's good, man. How many weeks are you into the Book of Colossians now with the students?
So we just second week, yeah. So we just finished up our second week. We just wrapped up chapter 1 this past week, and so yeah.
What have been, if any, some of the more interesting comments, questions, or perspectives from the students from the Book of Colossians?
Yeah, so students are not always the best at giving tons of feedback immediately and stuff, but and I'm also, like, we have student-led small groups where they kind of do more interaction, and so I try to pull myself out of that to let them, and then I kind of talk to our leaders afterwards and stuff. But one of the big things that we're trying to get them to understand here in those first couple of chapters is Paul is writing this from a place and for a purpose. And so this is one of the letters that Paul is writing from prison, and so kind of understand the context of that, this idea of continuing to be faithful in a difficult time, and that he still understood this, a greater purpose beyond his own circumstances at the time, and then also kind of the purpose of the letter. And there's this theme that runs throughout the Book of Colossians that Paul, I think, continues to try to hit on, and that is to declare both the supremacy and the sufficiency of Christ, that he is supreme, that he is who he says he is, because that is like the hinge for everything in Christianity, right? That Jesus is actually who he says he is, and that's what gives value to all the things that he did. And then also the sufficiency, that he is the only thing that is sufficient for the forgiveness of sins, that what he did is completely sufficient and is the only thing that is sufficient. And this is Paul kind of addressing and dealing with some teachings that were trying to trickle in and maybe pollute the minds of the believers there in Colossae at the time. But I think, too, as one of the things that I have heard back from some students is that we begin to talk about that, I think that they are intrigued sometimes that, there were people that, cause, we talk a lot about, oh, there's all this information out there that can mislead you and that can throw you, that can get you off track, or that and I talk about that with them all the time, right? Because this generation, more than any other, has access to so much information, right? They are absorbing all this stuff all the time. And so they need to know, like, how to tell what is true and what is not, what is of God and what is not. But it's interesting, I think, for them to see that, hey, even in the first century, there were false teachings going on. Even in the first century, there were people trying to mislead the people of God. Like, we're not the first to have to deal with this. Maybe it's more, readily available in the palm of our hand with with social media and with phones and all the access that we have online now. But this is not a new issue at its core, right? God has been having to, and Paul was doing it here. We see some of the other apostles and, do this throughout the New Testament, having to guide and lead the church to decipher what is true and what is not, what is right and what is not. And so I think just that's another one point, I guess, on that context, that connection that they begin to see, like, oh, okay, we're not alone in this. We're not the first to have to deal with this. God has been addressing these issues.
That's good. Another subject that's been addressed for generations in the church, throughout all of the time in Scripture, is rest and Sabbath rest. When we talk about leadership, it's a lot about what we do as leaders and in ministry. And then there has been some more talk about with rest. So how do you, as a leader in ministry of students pastor and missions pastor, how do you operate or handle that whole work life and rest balance?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, in the first few years, this was something I was really bad at, because coming from the background of being a student ministry intern, like, there's no such thing as rest. Like, you just go like 1,000 miles an hour all the time. Like, I was working like 100-hour weeks, making the money as if I would work in 10-hour weeks, right? Like, it's just the nature of being a student ministry intern. And so, like, an intern probably in general, right? And so, like, coming out of that mentality, when I first got here and began to serve, I wasn't very good at this. For one, when I first got here, my wife and I, we were only engaged. We weren't married yet. And so I didn't quite have as much to kind of work around there family-wise. And then when we first got married, it was an adjustment for me to begin to take into account, like, that I also have a responsibility, and even my first responsibility and obligation is my ministry to my family. And that was a hard thing for me to catch up with, because I just had this mentality that, oh, like, it's ministry. It's not bad that I'm doing it all the time. Like, it's not bad that it's keeping me out till this time at night and I'm going to do this thing, or, oh, that I got to take this phone call at whatever time, and, and that sort of thing, no matter what I'm doing with my family. And so it took some time. And so really over the last couple of years, I think is where I've been able to start to understand and get a little bit better at, whenever I go home and when I'm with my family, unless it is like an absolute like emergency, I'm probably not going to engage with it, right? Because I need, like, they need me in that time, and I need to be there with them. I need to be present with them, and that ministry is extremely important. And so, so that's been a huge thing for me. Like, you'll even see, like, on our staff texts and stuff, like, I am like non-existent. I don't really respond. I see them, but I'm just like, if nothing crazy happens that I like have to respond, like, and it's not just that text, right? Like, there's every other group text I'm in and stuff. I just kind of shut off, and I used to be the worst about not doing that. Like, I would just always turn on and engage with those things, and so really kind of creating this habit of trying to shut out. Like, I'm not the guy that necessarily like turns off all my stuff when I get home or whatever, but I try to kind of disengage from that stuff and really be able to engage with my family. And then the other kind of side of that rest that I used to not be good at and still am working on is just the personal kind of rest, because ministry can have this, and I think careers in the corporate world does this too, right? It's just this drive to be always doing something, and always there's progress to be made. There's something that can be accomplished. And so we can just go. But eventually we all have limits. We can, and we will hit a point of burnout. And I think we see that across ministry. There's pastors all across the country that just seem to be dropping like flies. And it's because they haven't found that balance. I think so many of them have just like, they've given everything to the ministry, where I don't know that is actually what God wants from us, that we give everything to just the vocational ministry, right, that we neglect our own personal walk with Him, our own personal relationship in our ministry to our families. Like, I think that is, it's a lot of people that had great intentions, and I think I was in that category too, have these great intentions, but we're missing a huge part of it. And so now I think, the last several years, tried to get better at taking that time to have some me time, to have some rest, to have some time that I can kind of wind down, to have that family time, and kind of be intentional about that, because I think sometimes there's a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, like I'll get to that, I'll do it. But if we don't really set aside time for our family, for ourselves, like to be able to rest, to be able to have just a time with God, right? Like if we're not intentional about setting aside times for those things, they're going to get pushed further and further down the list, and that work to-do list is going to get longer and longer, and push those things out of the way. And so I think it's important to do those things. It's important to find time to rest, and to, I think we had, back towards May or so, we did a little video like encouraging seniors and college graduates and stuff. And I think that weekend I'd gone away to we went camping for the weekend. And in that video, just kind of giving them some advice and encouragement, gave them that encouragement to find time to rest. Like that weekend, we got to just get away with the family, go be out. We love to go camping and stuff. Maybe that's not everybody's cup of tea, but we love to do that. And so just being outside, being in nature, kind of getting away from the busyness and just getting to enjoy God's creation. Everybody, I think, has different ways that they can experience rest and do those things, but I think it's intentional. We need to be intentional about making time to do that, both for ourselves and with our families.
That's good. And I appreciate your example and Pastor Nate's example of that. I mean, routinely, maybe quarterly or bi-monthly, Pastor Nate will ask, okay, who's taking vacation? Whose vacations are coming up? Who's taking off? And which is kind of, at first it was a culture shock, something I appreciated, but I had to get used to coming out of some ministries and industries from the past 15 years where vacation was not really brought up, or it was maybe not encouraged as strongly as Pastor Nate.
Down upon.
Like, well, why are you taking a vacation? Like, what is this Sabbath thing you're talking about? So that's been an encouragement to see you going out. Like you say, sometimes you'll say, I was golfing, or I'm going to go watch a game, whatever it may be, especially even on a Sunday. Now, I know I was talking to a pastor. He said that he would pretty much be like chastised if he ever asked for a Sunday off. But I had a conversation with Pastor Nate, and I said, hey, I would really like to get this coming weekend, off to go out with the family, because October is going to be really busy. And he goes, hey, if you need time off during one of our busy months, you just let me know, and we'll work it out. Which is so refreshing that you don't have to. That we don't have to worry about that because of his leadership, and even like the small things like the text messages, like you said. I know every once in a while it's like, hey man, I didn't reply to your text or whatever. But I get that. That's the culture. Again, as I mentioned, me coming from different cultures and industry and organizations and companies, where I'm getting blasted to like 9 o'clock at night and as early as 5 a.m. in the morning. It's been some getting used to for me to like you said, be engaged. Once I leave the office, everything that pertains to the office is left there. For me, it's something I'm still working on. I think we joked about that before, that when I'm with the family, it's hard for me to be like here with the family, because I'm thinking about something else. That's my personality trait, and my wife and I discussed that one of my giftings as far as personality traits and Myers-Briggs and all that goes is strategizing. But to strategize means to always be thinking about the future. The
wheels are always turning.
So when we're going grocery shopping, she'll stop. She's like, hey. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. That cereal box made me think about something. So and every once in a while, before we pull out the driveway, she's like, hey, do you need me to drive right now? I was like, I think I need you to drive because I'm thinking about something right now. Or no, I'm gonna drive, and I'm not gonna think about anything else. So
Yeah.
that's really refreshing, and encouragement from you and from Pastor Nate and everybody here. As you said, working with the different dynamics, playing to our strengths and weaknesses, and helping each other in those blind spots, and then just making sure we're all covering each other and helping each other whenever we need to take a break because of whatever it may be, emergencies that just came up or scheduled rest. To say, hey, no worries, I got you. You go take care of your family. Yeah, that's really good. With that, what was the next question here? Oh yeah, what do you do with a team member who maybe you've had bad chemistry with, and the rest of the team? Now, because we work with people and in ministry, the dynamic at the staff level may be great because we're working together on a daily basis. And then you include volunteers where you're now trying to teach them the church culture, and they're coming in with their own things, strengths and weaknesses, emergencies and happenings throughout family. And then sometimes you'll get two that just start rubbing up against each other. In your experience, what has been some ways you've helped mend those relationships or just move forward with those volunteers or team members? Yeah.
So like with volunteers specifically, I think like you mentioned something that's important there. So with staff, right, like we're kind of in this like fishbowl, right? Like we are with each other almost every day. We're talking about a lot of the same things all of the time. Like, especially when it comes to like the vision and like looking forward to like mission things for the church and just kind of what we want to do as a ministry and how we want to lead people and stuff. And so like that stuff's like really pressed into our brain and ingrained into us. And so like it's easy for us to be on board with those things. But when you start to bring in volunteers and stuff, I've learned, I think, to really be a little bit more patient with them because they're not in every meeting, right, that we're talking about. They're not hearing these things. And so also then, but on the flip side, while also being patient with them, to be diligent to begin to share that same message with them too, to begin to do that. Because oftentimes I think where that lack of like meshing and team members kind of fitting together come from is when they're trying to achieve two different things, but they don't know it, right? Like, if it's not clear what the goal is or somebody's going to develop a goal or some sort of intent in their mind. If we don't say one, they're going to come up with one. And so if we let that happen, though, then people could be trying to get to two different places thinking they're going the same way, and then they just keep clashing. And so this is something that I think that at Calvary we've grown at a lot. Like when I first got here, I don't know if that was so much part of our culture, at least maybe not for me. And I had to learn to be better at this, to really communicate what are our goals, what are our where are we trying to go? What is the purpose of this thing that we're doing? And if we share that with everybody, it's a lot easier for them to get on board. And then not only like to share what the goal is, hey, what are our plan? How are we planning to get there? What is your role in that? What are the expectations? Because that's the thing. Another thing that leads to bad meshing between team members and stuff is misunderstood expectations or and where maybe of team members amongst each other, volunteers amongst each other, a leader to a volunteer to a leader. So to be clear about what the expectation is from the leader, what the expectation is for the leader to act, what the expectation is for the volunteer and for how they're going to interact with each other, all those sort of things. Where I think earlier in ministry and younger, I would just kind of assume it's obvious, right? Like that we're going to do this and we should all like already know these things, right? But it's to not assume those things, but to be clear and intentional about explaining and making sure people understand what the expectation is, what the goal is. Because if so, I think people will get excited to serve and people want to be a part of achieving a goal. But if nobody knows what the goal is, right, then they can just get frustrated because then they just feel like they're serving or doing this thing that doesn't seem like it has an end, that doesn't seem like it has a purpose. And that's where you, I think, get to burnout for volunteers as well. But if people feel like they're being a part of something that actually means something, if they feel like they're being a part of something that actually accomplishes something, then I think they want to do that. And you're going to have much happier volunteers and you're going to have much better team chemistry, right? Because I think about it, I played sports my whole life growing up and literally every sport that you could play. And so, or at least that was available to me in East Texas growing up. And so there's some other sports that maybe we didn't have. But anyway, right, in any sport, team sport specifically, a coach, I think is such an important role you can have incredible athletes, like you can have great talent, but if you don't have somebody telling them what they're supposed to do and giving them a clear plan, then a lot of times that talent could be wasted. I mean, I've played on great teams that, and played with incredible athletes that we just couldn't seem to click and put it all together. But then I've also played on teams where maybe we weren't quite as talented, but we had somebody giving us really clear direction on where it was, and we had enough talent, to put these pieces together because we had a really clear plan. We knew what each of our roles were. We knew how we fit together in these things. We knew what the expectation was, and we also knew what the goal was. And so I think in the same way, when we think about teams and serving in churches, we can't just assume that people know that, right? Like, we can't just assume that people are going to jump in and do this. And I think that takes a little bit more work on the front end for leaders, but I think it's actually going to make your life a lot easier down the road and give you a lot less, like, you're going to be putting out a lot less fires and a lot less damage control down the road. And so maybe it takes a little more legwork on the front end, but I think it actually leads to a much more beneficial and pleasant experience, I think, for the volunteer and for the leader as well.
That's good. So in your time in ministry, let's say have you had any cases to where you've given clear expectations, you've set the goal, everybody's working together, but then there's just one person. You've done your best, you've been patient with them, kind, you've moved them around to see where they work best, but they're just not doing it. And maybe it even seems that they're being intentionally disruptive.
Yeah.
Have you had those experiences? And if so, what would you do as the next step? Do you remove them? What do you do?
Yeah. So, yes, I have had that experience because, like, for one, people aren't an exact science. We can do all these things and prep and try to prepare them. But sometimes, for whatever reason, somebody may not get on board. Somebody may be, like you said, even intentional, right? Like, it may not be that they don't know the expectation. They might actually be intentionally kind of trying to derail what you're doing. And so that happens at times. And I think, though, if you have set clear expectations and you've set those things and they're not meeting them, well, then if you have to remove somebody out of a position or say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to not do this anymore, to step aside from this role, or, like, hey, you're not going to be able to serve on this anymore and it's not because, hey, I don't like you. Look, I do like you. I care about you. It's because you haven't met these expectations that we've laid out. And that's where I think it goes back to that front end work too, because if you don't do that on the front end, people take it personal. Then if you need to remove somebody, then it's really uncomfortable because it's like, oh, well, you're just trying to get rid of me, or, oh, you're just singling me out. Right. And I've done that. This has happened even, as, one of the pillars kind of our student ministry is student leadership. And so we've had this even happen within our student leadership structure, and just having to have those hard conversations and say, hey, like, you haven't met the expectations. We have a values and expectations, like, kind of list that we go through whenever somebody wants to be a part of our leadership team. And I tell them in that meeting, if you're not meeting these, know that if I ever have to tell you, like, hey, you're not going to be a part of the leadership team, going forward, that it's because of this, and I will make sure I let you know what you're not doing then, because it is not personal at all. I want everybody who wants to be a leader and wants to be a part of that team to be able to do that. I want them to grow. I want them to serve and lead and pour into other students and those sort of things. But if you can't meet these expectations, then I need to look out for the other students that we're trying to lead. And so I can't have you be in this role if you're going to be detrimental to them, right? And so I think that's it. Having that structure in place gives you grounds to be able to have those hard conversations. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's still not easy. It's still awkward at times and stuff. And because you don't want to remove, it's never fun. Like, being an administrator, like, it's not like I come from a corporate background where I'm comfortable, like, firing people from jobs and stuff. That's not like something I do on a daily basis, but, or even less often than that. But, it gives me a way to be able to clearly say, look, hey, this is why I'm having to remove you from this role. And so, because it's hard to fire volunteers, right? But we're not firing this, like, hey, you haven't met the expectation that we laid out. And so for right now, and I typically try to give a path back to being able to step into a role in a leadership, because as a church, I want to extend grace. I want to see people grow and change. I'm not trying to write people off. But I think that, and sometimes it's that hard conversation that makes it click for somebody and says, okay, I need to I need to get back on track. And maybe it brings to light some things that they're, expectations that they're not meeting, that they're not even noticing, or whatever it may be. But yeah.
That's good. Yeah, like you said, right off the bat, starting off with expectations and standards, so that they know it's not a personal thing. You said you might be the best of friends.
Yeah.
But if you're not living according to the standards and expectations that pertain to the role and responsibilities, then it's not the best. And I love what you said there at the end, that you try to give them a pathway back. Because if they genuinely want to reset, and as you said, that conversation there might get them to open up their eyes and you see their heart. But if they don't want that path back, then we see where your heart is at. That's so good. I'm glad you put it that way. I was talking to another church leader about that. That unfortunately, there are some, I guess, church leaders that they're not sinning, so okay, but they're always showing up to meetings late, or they don't show up at all. We can't get anything done because they're not doing X, Y, Z. I was like, but they're not sinning, so but they're not being effective. And like you said, we don't fire volunteers, but they did take the first step to volunteer, and they knew what they were getting into, as long as you set those standards.
Well, and I think too, this is where the church has always kind of been this weird in between, right? Like, because in the corporate world, it's like people are really comfortable setting, like, these are the expectations, these are the standard, and like demanding excellence, right? Because they're not worried about anybody's feelings. But in the church, like, you are, right, to some extent, like, worried about the person, and you care about them. It's not like, all right, if you don't do it, we'll kick you out and the next person will come in and do it, right? We want to care for people better than that. But at the same time, though, I think that there should still be a standard or a level or expectation of excellence. We want to do what we do well. And so when we do that, like, there needs to be expectations. But I think that there's a way to still be gracious while being excellent. I think that it's okay to do that. And I think that's important. I don't think that that's actually just an option. I think that's really, like, almost a demand for churches. We ought to do that. Because what we're doing is important, so it should be excellent. What we're doing matters. It is, this is a ministry. Ministry is something that affects people's eternity, right? It matters, right? We're sharing the gospel, the good news of Jesus, like, that matters. So it needs to, the way we handle, because everything that we do, even the small tasks, right, are all building towards that kind of greater purpose. So we want to do them well, but also we don't want to just, like, cut people off and push them away forever, right? Like, we want to give people a path back to be able to serve. We want to be able to help them grow. That's discipleship, right? We want people to be growing and learning and getting better. And so discipleship, discipling someone often requires pointing out things that maybe they're not doing okay right now. And we, I think, as leaders, even need people to be doing that for us as well. And so it's not that, like, hey, I just get to sit around and tell everybody where they're messing up, but we need that as well, because we all need to be growing. We all need to be getting better. So.
That's good, man. That's good and healthy advice on church leadership and just leadership in general. Well, hey, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on here. You shared some insightful things that I'm going to be chewing on for a while. I know a lot of people who have the opportunity to listen to and watch this are going to be chewing on it for a while. And I want to say again, thank you for you helping me and encouraging me with this event that we have coming up, which is part of our missions emphasis. It's in October. Before we go, can you share a little bit about October 02 missions emphasis?
Yeah, so here at Calvary every October, we have what we call 02, which is our October outreach month. And so we just kind of emphasize different mission efforts and just kind of, whether it be training here or events like what we're partnering with Radial Faith to do this year. And so there's all sorts of things that we do, but each year we kind of try to find ways that we can both encourage our people here at Calvary to get out of their normal routine, and also then to be able to equip them to be more evangelistic, to be more missional just in the way that they live every day. And so we're going to have several things coming up. We're getting to host, and Radial Faith is having the For the King conference here at Calvary, and I think that'll be a great time for people to come together from all over the community to be able to be equipped and encouraged. And then the following week, we're going to have a training on that Sunday evening at 5 o'clock, the 16th, I believe. And so that'll be a great chance for people to be equipped and give some practical evangelism tools, just ways to be able to talk about God and to get to a point of being able to share the gospel, and even just some foundational things of what is the gospel, what is evangelism, these sort of things, and help people. And so this is open to others in the community as well. If you want to attend, that'll be here at Calvary, and it's just a real practical kind of down to earth, give you a chance to practice some that night, have some kind of role play conversations with people, sharing the gospel and having gospel conversations that we might just be able to have in our everyday life with friends, family, people that we meet in the community. And then we'll kind of, the tail end of our month kind of all leads towards our Fall Fest here, which is a great chance for us to be able to open our doors and our property here and facilities to our community, to be able to love on them, to give a safe place for families to come have a Fall Fest experience, be able to hang out, have a good time, and for us just to be able to love on them and to meet people. And so everybody from the community is welcome to come join us. That's going to be on October 30th. Here from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock at the church. And so we would love to have everybody out for that too. And so exciting, looking forward to some great things in the next month, and opportunities for God to give us to be able to share the gospel, to equip people to share the gospel. And so we're looking forward to it.
Great, man. Well, hey, thanks again for jumping on. Looking forward to the event and all that we have in store here at Calvary. October, November, December, everything's coming up, man. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, George.
Yes, sir. Bye.